Okay, page 126. Later in this research, we will explore the fascinating parallels between rock and spiritual faith and what Christ revealed concerning them. The permanence of stone and the unyielding faith of those who believe in him are integral to one's ascent upon the ladder of Set. Because as humans, we cannot enter into his presence in purity, and further, he knows we are unclean and without a garment to cover our nakedness. There exists an older concept attached to the title Amen: debt cancellation. Amen was the expression used when one accused another for an outstanding debt. The speaking of this word to a debtor signified that his debt was forgiven and canceled. As time passed, the name Amen to the Hebrews became simply a designation for the truth. 74. And in Egypt, Amen later merged with another popular deity to become Amen-Ra, principally worshipped at the Karnak complex in Waset, Thebes, in Upper Egypt to the south. This connection to Ra, a solar deity, is very intriguing, for Ra was worshipped as a stone shaped like a pillar with a pyramidion atop it that stood upon a base of masonry. 75. An obelisk. Though found numerous times in the Old Testament, the name Amen is found only once in the New Testament. The book of the Revelation, the Son of God, is called the Amen. These things saith the Amen, the faithful and the true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. 76. Amen is represented by the image of the pyramid. The pyramid of Sariad was designed to be a witness at the border of the Lord in Egypt, according to Isaiah the prophet. And this witness was fulfilled with Christ, who is the image of the invisible God. 77. The purpose of the Giza monument is twofold. One, the stone monuments and their guardian conceal in geometrical mysteries the name of the Creator, while also silently promising the diligent that this mystery will one day be made manifest. Giza's other function just may be a literal gate between heaven and earth and the underworld. This is purely conjectural, but taking into consideration that this monument was built specifically with the intent of warning future generations of the last day's judgment upon the earth, could this complex actually have some physical engineering function with its descending passage and subterranean pit for a purpose known only to God on Judgment Day? It is on this day that the Creator becomes a destroyer, and not of the world only, but even the very fabric of the souls of men will on that day be condemned. The purpose of Giza was to hide something of grave importance to humanity, a secret guarded so closely that it is unimaginably obvious to the extent that we are blinded by its truth. Almost suspiciously, the stele near the Sphinx reads, "Thou hast built for thee a place protected in the sacred desert with hidden name." 78. There is something spiritually compelling about the Giza monuments that drives men to travel great distances just to look upon its outer surfaces. For thousands of years, people have come from lands at the edges of the world to see the pyramids. Some of these people compelled their cultures to attempt to replicate these buildings, and soon after, these lesser monuments became centers of pilgrimage. Several hundred pyramids wrap around the world within the geographical area known as the Pyramid Belt, extending from China all the way up to the dense jungles and high mountains of America. Pyramids within this belt have even been discovered on dozens of seemingly insignificant islands and even under the sea. This massive pyramid copying campaign ended abruptly with massive geological upheavals and flooding all along the equatorial zones of the pyramid belt, tremendous earthquakes and volcanism that has occurred periodically since the Great Deluge. In Abu Feda's Historia Anti-Islamitica, it is stated that Syria was one of the earliest inhabited countries, and that the Syriac language was the first that was spoken, that the Sabaean language was established by Seth and Edris, Enoch, that there was a town called Haran to which pilgrims resorted, as they did so to the large pyramids of Giza. Giza? It must be one of which was said to be the tomb of Edris, 79. This was confirmed by another Arab writer who said that pilgrims made trips to visit the Great Pyramid. This was Ibn Atalif, and he claimed to have read in the books of the Sabaeans that one of the pyramids was the tomb of Agatha Daimon, the other of Hermes. Agatha-daemon was the person of Seth, 80, and Hermes would herein be Enoch. Edris, the Enoch of the Arabic Quran, was not buried there, but the mentioning of his name in reference to the pyramids at Giza serves to show that even the Arabian religious writings, at least in part, were ultimately borrowed from a parent source. Haran was the land of the Chaldeans and is the origin of the people historians have come to call Hurrians. It was also where Abraham lived with his father Terah. Abraham lived during the reign of King Nimrod, who was several years earlier the king of Akkad and is identified on Sumerian records as Amar Udadak. I've heard him mention that. Occasionally, get myself confused. Actually, the Hebrew patriarch Abram was also of direct Sumerian descent, and as was most of Babylonia. Why'd I get confused? I looked at something different, and then I tried to come back, and it didn't work out. I'm going to keep going, though. I don't care. He was called a Hebrew, meaning sojourner, and as such, he lived up to this name, for he traveled and spent years of his life in Canaan, Philistia, Egypt, and Syria. Too many today assume the early Hebrews were racially different than the Babylonians, and such is false, for Abram was Chaldean, a holy man separated from his culture by a fervent yearning to obey the will of God. Of great interest to this study is that Abram went to Egypt according to Genesis, and other Hebraic records tell that he traveled to Egypt more than once. The book of Jasher reveals that Abram was famous throughout Babylonia and Canaan for his testimony against the evils of the king of Babylon, Nimrod, Amar Udaak, and for his part in the defeat of the Elamite Confederation, recorded in Genesis 14 when the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were taken captive and then returned safely by the valor of Abraham, his household servants trained in war, and his Amorite allies in Canaan. He was raised in the house of Noah, who was at that time very old and looked after by the Semitic peoples living in Canaan. Under Noah's tutoring, Abram became learned in the secrets and sciences of the antediluvian world. He became a student of pre-flood astronomy and was initiated into the hidden mysteries of time-keeping under the early draconian calendrical systems and the newer post-apocalyptic modified systems, and all scribal lore and chronological histories. Noah and Shem taught Abram firsthand the history of the world before the flood and the prophetic writings of their forefathers concerning the end of the world and the return of God to earth. Abram also studied the writings of Enoch, 81, which were at that time inscriptions also studied by his great-grandson Simeon, 82. The Quran tells that Abraham left behind a book of writings himself, 83. Much of the teachings of Noah were from the books that he preserved upon the ark, 84. Noah's wisdom and knowledge was immense. Having lived under the pristine climate and atmospheric conditions of the world prior to the deluge, he was a man born under better genetic circumstances that allowed him to live so long. He was already 600 years old at the cataclysm, and if the Sumerian records are true, Noah was a king of the city of Shurappak long prior to the flood. Having spent 40 years learning from this ancient man, Abram himself was a remarkable repository of information. He was the only man on earth 350 years after the flood when Noah died to fully grasp the vast spectrum of the mysteries of God both before and after the deluge. Abram visited Egypt, and it is the author's belief that such an incredible man could never have left Egypt unaffected. Hebraic traditional writings hold that Abraham went to Egypt and taught the astrologers and wise men of Pharaoh's court great secrets of God hidden in the stars and celestial motions. Such a claim is also confirmed in the Masonic document called the Wood Manuscript, which dates from 610 A.D. The Wood Manuscript claims that the sciences and knowledge taught by Abraham had been derived from one of the pillars that had been discovered, and that as one learned in the scribal mysteries of the Sumerians, Abraham understood these writings and related them to the Egyptians, 85. This pillar was one of the Giza pyramids covered in minute inscriptions from the pre-flood world seen by the baffled Greek and Roman historians almost 2,000 years later. The Masonic Indigo Jones document cited the same information. However, Abraham here is substituted for Hermes. It is clear that Abraham is the subject of the context. However, because the text claims the antediluvian writings were found upon excavated pillars that were translated by a minister to Oswiris, close enough, king of Egypt, during the reign of Ninus, who was Nimrod according to the Assyrians, 86. Alexandrian historians identified two distinct Hermes figures. The first was the builder of the pillars, and the second was much later. It was the second Hermes that found the pillars and translated them, according to Iamblichus, who wrote that this second Hermes lived after the flood, 87. And this would no doubt be Abraham, who according to this Indigo Jones document, taught the ancient Egyptians the zodiac and the secrets of the stars, hieroglyphics, and diverse sciences. Such is further substantiated in the book of Jasher, which states that in the days of Abraham, the king of Egypt was Oswiris, the son of Anam, Mena, 88. The Jasher account extensively outlines Nimrod's life and reign and even his personal experiences with Abram, the son of one of his favored Babylonian war generals. The connection between Osiris, second ruler of Egypt, and Nimrod of Chaldea is nothing short of astonishing. But even more incredible is the evidence that this minister to the Egyptian ruler was in fact Abraham. Cyrillus Alexandrinus in Contra Julianum 89 wrote that long ago a powerful Chaldean visited Egypt, a man of immense wisdom. Such a historical reference would not have been recorded if this stranger had not left a powerful impact upon the Egyptian people at such a remote time in their culture's infancy. Many Chaldeans have visited Egypt. In such an incredibly wise man of learning did visit Pharaoh's court, then such an event could not have remained unacknowledged in Egypt's archives. Setting aside the apparent anachronisms so prevalent in interpretations of Egyptian history, we learned that in an Egyptian record called the Westcar Papyrus does tell that during the reign of Khufu, a foreigner visited Egypt, a venerable man of 110 years in age who was believed to be able to perform miracles but was known greatly for his vast wisdom. Of particular fascination to the sages of Pharaoh's court was the fact that the stranger to Egypt was acquainted with the mysteries of Thoth, Enoch, 90. Abraham was a Chaldean by birth and a savant of the mysteries of Enoch through Noah and Enoch's inscriptions upon the tablets kept safe by the Sethites after the flood. At age 110, Abraham was living among the Philistines at the eastern borders of the land of Egypt, so it is not improbable that he could have spent a considerable amount of time translating these pyramid inscriptions at Giza for the Egyptians. The Greek historian Herodotus may have inadvertently recorded this as well. Concerning the pyramids at Giza, he wrote that they had been built by one called Philitian, which merely is a Grecian title meaning native of Ion near Giza, 91. In Civilization or Barbarism, Cheke Antediop on page 281 wrote that it was Philistus who brought the secrets of the calendar into Egypt, exactly what is said of Thoth, Hermes, and Enoch. The Westcar Papyrus reveals that this 110-year-old man knew the number of the chambers of Thoth, some Egyptologists interpreting this to mean secret chambers of the primeval sanctuary, according to Zechariah Sitchin in the Wars of Gods and Men. This visitor to Egypt of old claimed to know where the plans with numbers were hidden. This no doubt was what Abraham found inside the primeval sanctuary or Great Pyramid. It is quite possible that he did not build these monuments, but because of his own fame, he later became identified with them. All of this further identifies Abraham, who was a shepherd and a nomad who was living in that area at the Philistine city of Gerar when he was 110. It is obvious that after the passage of so many years, the historical accounts of different scribes and records would have become slightly confused. It is not a stretch of the imagination to assume that the Egyptians would have later credited this stranger with building the monuments if he had been remembered as the one who translated the mysterious writings found upon them. All evidence points that the enigmatic writings of the Book of the Dead, as well as some of the older biblical records and the ancient writings of many early civilizations, merely borrowed their source material from the inscriptions preserved through the flood that were engraved into the faces of the Great Pyramid. Though Egyptologists claim that the writings that constitute the Book of the Dead were so extensive that they required editing and abbreviation into shorter works to be adequately used, this appears to be the case with most of the world's oldest historical writings. This is especially the case with the little understood and mysterious Edfu wall text. Discovered in Upper Egypt to the far south of Egypt was an archive of ancient glimpses into an even earlier past that appear to have been unique to Edfu. Even more peculiar is that Edfu writings tell of the plans for a great temple that predated the other temples of Egypt that dropped out of heaven near Memphis, and that Imhotep built this edifice according to these plans. 92. Memphis is the area of the Giza Plateau, only a few miles between them. What's interesting is that these Edfu records were found on the far side of Egypt to the deep south, on the edges of Nubia instead of near Memphis. These plans are the divine instructions received by Enoch concerning the architectural dimensions of the Great Pyramid. The Edfu inscriptions tell of a distant history of Egypt concerning the first time, Zetepi, the primordial sages, primeval gods, and the abysmal waters of the Nun that existed prior to the creation of our world, of alien gods before the Egyptian deities, an enemy in the visage of a serpent, and a great conflict that brought this earlier world to a devastating end. Linking these writings to the Book of the Dead and Great Pyramid is the fact that these writings are attributed to Thoth. Andrew Collins in Gods of Eden, Egypt's Lost Legacy and the Genesis of Civilization, cites these strange writings and goes on to write that all of the inhabitants of this earlier world perished when the world was brought back out of the darkness of ruin. The world contained the ghosts of this earlier civilization. The only relic to have survived this judgment was a single Giza pillar located in the field of reeds. 93. This would serve to identify the delta area and surrounding regions where Giza lies, for the field of reeds is adjacent to the Sea of Reeds, commonly referred to in the scriptures as the Red Sea, crossed by the Israelites fleeing Egypt. The story is the same the world over, but the more it is told, the more fascinating the parallels become. The Babylonian historian Berosus wrote that the god Cronus bade Exisosthorus, Noah, to set down a writing of the beginning, middle, and end of all things before the flood. This god told his earthly servant that after the deluge he was to recover the writings and publish them for men to see. The account reads that these writings were located after the catastrophe and duped up. 94. Assuming Argendo, I can't say that word, Arguendo, that these were merely small books, why not just take them upon the ark? This author believes that these books were not small, nor was it possible to have taken such a vast archive of knowledge through the cataclysm, but that they were meticulously inscribed upon the Great Pyramid, and that there were originally 4 of these gigantic books that correspond to the 4 faces of the monument, just as there were 4 Gospels giving men different versions of the same messianic story, and there stand 4 watcher guardians around the throne of God. Though embellishments crept into this account and exaggerations focused on localizing the tradition to Babylon rather than on the material facts that corroborate the hundreds of other legends and myths from other nations in antiquity, we find additional collaboration. I'm sorry. Let's see, I'm going to go back and redo that. focused on localizing the tradition to Babylon rather than on the material facts that collaborate the hundreds of other legends and myths from other nations in antiquity. We find additional collaboration in India, where again the same operable facts remain the same, but the traditions are centrally focused within the subcontinent. There is an immense aura of mystery attached to India. Its culture is an enduring one and hold on. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that part tomorrow.